one more time. Oh, yeah, I was supposed to say record. Put the Eduphoria link back in the chat.
Sure.
One more time for the people who just joined us. In case you did not register in Eduphoria, there will be some parts of this presentation that do require your participation. So we thank you in advance for that participation. But that will come a little later. So we're going to go ahead and start. You more than likely have seen this slide on many different presentations, but we always like to start with this slide because it gets to the heart of why the STAAR was redesigned in the first place. And I'm just going to go through these 4 things. It says that in effective classrooms, teachers are coherently building students' background knowledge and vocabulary in all subject areas. They're asking students to write about what they read and use evidence from text. They're providing various open-ended formats for students to respond to questions. They're supporting the learning needs of all students by providing appropriate accommodations. And what we would like, or what TEA would like us to avoid, less effective practices by not just having students read passages on random topics, by not just reading without also writing, by not just having students select among multiple choices, and by not just requiring all students to perform without the appropriate accommodations. That said, the STAAR redesign is based on improving alignment to the classroom experience. And based on those 4 things on the left-hand side, they wanted to make sure that they prioritize cross-curricular passages in reading and language arts. So, of course, you will expect to see science and social studies passages. They will include writing in all the reading and language arts tests, reflecting the updated TEKS and having students write text-based responses. They will add new non-multiple choice questions, which you have seen over the past couple of years, that are more like the questions teachers ask in class. And of course, we are moving to online assessments that generally provide a full and robust suite of accommodations for students with specific learning needs.
So this is talking specifically about the writing portion of the new item types. And so this is talking about one of the changes for the rewrite is to base writing and speaking in text as it better reflects effective instructional practices. So you can see we have 2 types of prompts. One is in green. It says, what is your favorite place that you've traveled to? And then what did it look like? And what was your favorite part? And then there's another one that's below it in blue. Read these 2 articles about different locations using evidence from the articles. Write a summary of disadvantages and advantages of the location and your recommendation. So you can see they're both based on going somewhere, a place, but the first is based on a personal experience, whereas the second is really using the text to craft a response. And so the STAAR is going to go towards the second because it gives kids more opportunities to explain their thinking and ground themselves in the text that they're given rather than looking at children's life experiences and writing from that. Here's an example of a prompt that would be like this on the STAAR RLA. So in the past, you know that the prompt was just a prompt, right? It wasn't based on text. So here you can see there is the spelling test, which is a play. So it's a literary text. And then you can see the prompt in the bold, explain how Herbie's behavior changes and how this is developed by the playwright. And then if you go further down, it says write a well-organized informational essay. And so children are writing an informational essay based on a literary text. And so that is an example of what we will see on the STAAR with the changes.
All right, so just jumping in, of course, there's 2 types of constructed response. There's the short constructed response. And of course, in language arts, there is the extended constructed response. In just a second, you're going to see some links in the chat for new question type scoring and reporting guides. We just wanted to share those with you. There's one guide per content area, and it basically just gives you an overview of each new question type, including examples from the sampler, sample responses, potential partial credit, what educators could see in the reporting system after STAAR is administered. We are going to get more into the actual scoring today, and you're going to actually get to score some science and language arts passages, and we're going to have some discussions about those as well. So for the short constructed responses, these will show up in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade reading and language arts, as well as in 5th grade science. The student gives a brief explanation in their own words that demonstrates their understanding of the content. For writing, students are going to demonstrate proficiency in the skill being assessed by constructing a sentence that corrects a revising error. There's going to be a limit of 475 characters, and that does not include spaces.
All right, so let's talk about the reading short constructed responses. Reading and writing are a little different, as you will see. So in the reading, the student is giving a brief explanation in their own words to demonstrate understanding of content. So that means students will have read some passages, like just think of like STAAR reading last year. Kids read some passages, let's just say 3 as an example. They answer questions based on those. Then the next part, as part of that, answering all those questions, like the ABC, multiple choice, this item type may show up in that little area as a question, along with the multiple choice and other things. And so kids would give a little brief explanation, demonstrate their understanding, and then move along to the next item on the reading part, if that makes sense. Then there will be a point value of 2. So you can see, I know this is, that was good. You can go to the next one. Let's go. Okay, so you can see there would be a point value of 2. Here's an example of what it would look like on the screen for kids, since it is an online test. So you can see this is a grade 5 sampler, and it says read the question carefully, then enter your answer in the box provided. You can see at the bottom the characters are there in the corner. Based on paragraph 7 of the article, the cholla cactus, what does the wood rat use the cholla cactus to build its nest? Support your answer. So kids would type that in, and then Askia can go to the next. So then this gives you a little bit more information on the scoring. So once the kids answer that, they're going to have an item specific rubric, which is different than the other item type, which is extended response, which we'll talk about in a minute. But this is item specific rubric. So for 2 points, the student will correctly explain why the wood rat uses the cholla cactus to build its nest using supporting evidence from the article. Then if they were to get a 1, which is partial credit, which is a good thing about this item type, for reading, they can gain partial credit. This says the student will correctly explain why the wood rat uses the cholla cactus to build its nest without using supporting evidence from the article, or the student will cite relevant text evidence without an accurate answer. So there is some partial credit, and then of course it could be a score point of 0 if if it's just completely incorrect, or not passage based, or if it's missing. Hopefully that helps you understand what the reading short answer or short constructed response would look like. For writing, it is a little different. As you can see in the description, in writing, students demonstrate proficiency in the skill being assessed by constructing a sentence that corrects a revision or editing error. So you go back to a passage and you think, there's a couple of sentences there that are not written correctly. The child will see a little box and they'll type that in, or maybe, edit something. This is 1 point, so it's a little different than the reading. The writing will be 1 point for the short constructed response. Here's an example. This is a 7th grade example. This is the state gave us no samples, and so we didn't have any from elementary, but we do have this one that does seem like it could apply, just at a different level. Rose wants to combine the ideas in sentence 4 and 5. So going back to a passage, right? Looking for those sentences. And then in the space provided, write a new sentence that combines these ideas in a clear and effective way. So going back to the passage and then rewriting. Where in the past, in the previous STAAR, the kids would just choose ABC. This is a little bit more asking them to construct that sentence on their own. And then you can see, again, this one is a 1 point, so that's a little different than reading. So this one doesn't receive partial credit. It's either full credit or 0 points. And to receive full credit, they have to compose a complete sentence that combines ideas in a clear and effective way. And then a 0 is not a complete sentence or it didn't combine ideas effectively.
Any questions so far? You want to have anything? You're welcome to unmute yourself if you have a question or type it in the chat. We will be monitoring the chat throughout. So if you think about a question, you write it down and you want to wait till the end, that's perfectly fine as well. All right, let's get into actually scoring some science short constructed responses. So again, here's the description of what it is. It's up to 2 points. It'll be in grade 5 and grade 8. And it's really important that you see the calibration of like what a student response might score so that you can align that to how you're scoring in the actual classroom. So we're going to start, and again, this is just an example of one of those short constructed responses. All right, and now we're going to practice. So I'm going to read this out loud. I want you to follow along with me. It says, water and oil are poured into the same container. An object is added. The materials are allowed to sit and their final positions are shown in the image below. How would you describe the density of the object in relation to the oil and water? So I read it out loud to you. I know sometimes we need to process and read it silently, so I'll give you about 30 seconds to read the question again. Make sure you pay particular attention to the actual question that's being asked. All right, and then we have a rubric. In science, they will be item specific. So in language arts, some of the rubrics are more generic to go along with any passage, but in science, they'll be item specific to that question. So for this particular question, in order to get a 0, you have to incorrectly explain density and not actually answer the question. In order to get 1 point, you might explain density in relation to either the oil or the water, but not both. So if we were to go back to the question, you would see that the question asks you to explain density in relation to the oil and the water. And then to get a 2, they explain density in relation to both the oil and the water, and they actually use some of the vocabulary terms that are listed there. So we have 3 passages, and it's very small at the bottom, but the actual rubric as well as the question is here at the bottom. And then I have 3 responses here. I will give you some time to read through them, all 3, and think about how you would score them. And then we'll do each one and then have a little discussion about each one. So if you're in a group, you're welcome to have discussions, because I did notice that some of you had one camera and there's like 10 of you in the room. So that's great. If you're sitting next to someone and you can have a conversation, do that right now as you go through and attempt to score each of these 3 sample responses. I think I'll give you like 3 minutes and I will take my face off the camera. All right, so I'm going to read the first one, and then I'm going to actually ask you to respond. So the first student responded, density describes how compact something is. In this picture, the object is less dense than oil, but more dense than water. When something is more dense, it will float, and when something is less dense, it will sink. So based on your discussions or your internal conversation with yourself, let's score that one based on either a 0, a 1, or a 2. And you can type that in the chat and I will be looking at it. All right, so it appears I was not able to trick y'all with that one. The morning session, I was able to trick because that definition is primarily correct. The density describes how compact something is. However, the question didn't ask for you to give a definition of density. It specifically asked how it related to the oil and the water. And this student actually inverted them and said it the wrong way. So this actually would get a score of 0 because they did not correctly answer the question. All right, let's look at option 2 or response 2. The object in the image is more dense than oil, but less dense than water. I can tell that it is more dense than oil because it sinks to the bottom of the oil. Things that are more dense sink. The object is less dense than the water because it floats on top of the water. What would you give that? It appears that the consensus is full credit, and you are exactly correct. The student answered the question, provided an explanation, and used some vocabulary to let you and the scorer know that that particular answer is correct. All right, let's look at the last one. Rock is more dense than oil, less dense than water, so it floats on the water, but not the oil. I'm waiting to see if any answers come in that are not a 1 so far. It appears that everyone chose partial credit. So let's go back let's look at the rubric. Student's explanation does not explain density or explains it incorrectly. We know that's not it. Student explains density in relation to the oil and water, but not both. They appear to do both. Student explains density in relation to both oil and water and uses terms such as more dense, less dense, float, and sink. So, Rhonda, you are correct. Although that answer is not necessarily in a great sentence and it's a short answer, it actually did do what the rubric said. It explained the density in relation to both the oil and water and did it correctly, and it used vocabulary. And I see that someone said it doesn't include sink. The rubric says such as, so it doesn't have to include every one of those vocabulary words, but it does have to include some just to let the score teacher know that the student understood. Any questions or comments, anything anyone would like to share about this scoring? I purposely threw that last one in there because sometimes we see a very, very short answer when everyone else has a long answer. And sometimes we assume that that is not a fully correct answer, and it can be. And just because an answer is really long, it could be a whole bunch of nothing. So just keep that in mind. All right. I was supposed to go to this slide before I asked you about questions and comments, but did anyone else have anything they wanted to say, share, ask a question? Julie, do you know the answer to that question for students who receive speech-to-text accommodation for written compositions? How will they able to use that accommodation with this testing platform?
I do not know enough about the speech-to-text accommodation. We'll definitely find out about that question. I know TEA has an FAQ. We could look in that FAQ, but we'll try to get an answer for you, Allison, and let y'all know about that answer.
But that is a very good question, and we will definitely look for an answer. And just going forward, as we go through scoring some more passages for language arts, also keep in mind that what we're sharing with you right now is pretty much all that TEA is given. Sometimes some things may seem vague, and if that's the case, you're definitely you should ask the question. However, it's possible that our answer might be we don't know yet, because we're going off of all of the available information that TEA has shared with us at this time.
That is correct. We are definitely learning as we go this year. So what is new for grades 3 through 5? So let's talk about this a little bit. So this is in respect to the writing. So beginning in 2023, which is this spring, the essay component will shift from a standalone prompt to writing in response to reading selections. So that's just something that you're probably already aware of. No more fourth grade writing, and now third, fourth, and fifth will all have a writing in response to reading selection. Students will write in one of two possible modes. So the modes being informational or argumentative opinion. So, and we don't know. It says they will be scored using a 5-point rubric. And as I said, we won't know. The genres of the ECRs will not be released before testing. So we have to have our students prepared for either mode and how to respond to reading in that way. And then the rubric will be 2 parts, 2 components, the idea development, and then the language conventions. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. And then responses may be up to 2,300 characters long, not including spaces. So then just a little overview again, just to make sure you understand the ECR item. Extend response, also the long way to say it, will be developed as a performance task in response to a single reading passage or a paired passage. So just kind of to visualize what this means is if you think about if you taught last year, if you took reading or you administered reading last year, right? Your kids had read some passages, they answer questions, and they read, answer questions. That's kind of how the reading works. So with the ECR, this is how my understanding from what DA has shared, this is my understanding of what it will be. Students will have their reading passages, say there's 3, they'll read those, answer the questions, and then once they've answered all those questions to all the passages, however many that there are, then they'll move on to a second section, it sounds like, and that second section will be the ECR, the extended constructed response, which will then prompt children to write in response to one of the passages they read or 2 of the passages they read, if that makes sense. The ECR items will require students to analyze, evaluate, or explain aspects. I think those are really important verbs to think about, especially as we're working with our kids on a daily basis. And that will require the analysis, evaluation, and explanation of craft, message, structure, or to synthesize ideas across text. So those strands and the standards really coming into play a lot there on that. And then to demonstrate understanding, Students will be required to incorporate supporting evidence from the associated reading passages. And that's going to be really important, that they need to have that evidence based in their writing response. So I said we'd talk a little bit more about the rubric. So we have two parts of the rubric: the idea development in blue, and then in orange, the language conventions. You can see that the idea development portion of the rubric will count for 3 points, and the language conventions will account for 2 points. And the bullets kind of explain what those will look like, and we're going to look deeper at a rubric in just a little bit. So that's how the 5 point up to 5 points could be established for a student. We're going to watch this little video where this from TEA, where they explain a little bit more about the rating process and the scoring process.
How are constructed response questions scored accurately and consistently across the state? Let's first start by defining what we mean by a constructed response question. These are open-ended questions that require students to answer in their own words. These types of questions allow students more ways to show their understanding and are more like questions asked in the classroom. Because students can respond in countless ways, constructed response questions are reviewed by 2 human raters who read each response and scored according to a standardized rubric. To be hired as a rater, you must have a 4-year college degree and experience teaching at the assigned grade level. Raters undergo rigorous training to learn how to use the standardized rubric to score student responses. A rubric is a scoring guide that identifies the content knowledge or skill being assessed and provides clear criteria to differentiate between responses that would earn different scores. During training, raters are given student responses that already have an established score. To pass training, raters' scores must match the established score. The same process occurs during scoring. During scoring, raters are calibrated at regular intervals. Raters don't know which responses are used for calibration, and they must match the established score in order to continue scoring student responses. This way, we can ensure that all constructed response questions are scored accurately and consistently across the state. For more on STAAR, check out texasassessment.gov.
Okay, so these are the rubrics that we're in a minute. We're specifically going to do some scoring. So we're going to look at the informational rubric. We will share the slide deck with you after the presentation so you can have access to these. And so in just a minute, I'll drop for you the 1-pager for the informational. So here's an example. The TEA did release some responses, student responses that are scored for grades 3 through 5. And so this is the extended response from that response scoring guide that is given and shared with us. So the prompt was: steamboats and clippers were popular forms of transportation in the United States in the 1800s. Explain whether you think the steamboat or the clipper ship changed life in the United States more. So you know that there's going to be one of 2 modes, right? There's going to be an informative essay mode or maybe an argumentative opinion. So you can tell this is an argument of opinion response because it says explain whether you think the steamboat or the clipper ship changed life in the United States more. So kids are having to read that passage and then determine, which they think, and then argue that in their response. There is a student response to that. There are some available for that 5th grade response. If you want to see those students' responses, it is only a 5th grade sample given to us in English, so we don't have in English the examples of the informative. However, we do have on this interim here for our December interim that you took in 4th grade, this is the prompt that they had, and it is an informative essay. And so we thought we would spend some time looking at this and some student samples just to give ourselves some practice with the rubric, practice looking at student writing and using that rubric and the language in the rubric to start thinking about what we would score. So Askia has dropped for you in the chat. Thank you, Askia. A one-pager. So if you want to click on that link and open your one-pager, this is, again, the STAAR Informational Writing Rubric for grades 3 through 5. And basically, I just put it in this chart because the state's document was not really that easy to use. So I've cited at the bottom a link to the actual informational rubric if you would like to see that. So let's just, before we go into scoring and looking and thinking about this prompt, let's just kind of orientate ourselves with the rubric. Let's give it a review. You can look on yours or on the slide, whichever one. So let's think about this. So we know that there's two parts, right? This part that is on the screen right now is the organization and development ideas section. And then as you can see on the screen, the second section, which is down below, is conventions. Thank you. Yeah, so then for organization of development of ideas, remember we have 3 points. So you see a 3 category, a 2 category, a 1 category, and then a 0. So a 3, let's just think through this a little bit more. In this, we have 4 boxes that go with each score point. So for a 3, it says central idea is clearly and fully developed. For a 2, it says central idea is present and partially developed. And for a 1, the central idea is evident but not developed. So I'm reading like this bold statement. It kind of gives like a big picture, and then underneath it is a statement that drills in a little bit more. But for the purpose of our efficiency of time, right now I'm just going to overview that part. And then there's a 0. So that first category is really thinking about the central idea of the piece. And then we'll go to the next row, which is organization. So then it says organization is effective. Organization is limited for a 2. For a 1, organization is minimal and or weak. So thinking about the organization that the child used. And so then the third row is evidence. We know evidence is really important to the response, the written response. So evidence is specific, well chosen, and relevant for a 3. For a 2, evidence is limited and may include some irrelevant information. And then a 1, evidence is insufficient and or mostly irrelevant. Okay. And then we're going to go down to that last row. So the last piece of what they're looking at in the organization and development ideas is expression of ideas. So let's see what that looks like. So for a 3, the main descriptor is expression of ideas is clear and effective. For a 2, expression of ideas is basic. And then for a 1, expression of ideas is ineffective. As we score in a little bit, we're going to really need that extra information below each main descriptor. But for now, that gives us a big picture of what we're looking at. And then for conventions, remember, conventions is 2 points. And so we have either a 1 or a 0. And so a 2 being for conventions, consistent command of grade appropriate conventions. And then you can see including the list of bulleted items. For a 1, we have inconsistent command. And for a 0, we have little to no command. And also as part of that, below the bullet points, I feel that part is also helpful too. It says the response has few errors, but those errors do not impact the clarity of the writing. For 1, the response has several errors, but the reader can understand the writer's thoughts. And then 0, the response has many errors and the errors impact clarity. There is also, yes, Askia, if you'll go back to that main rubric for organization and development of ideas. Let's see. Yes, okay. Also, this came up in the last session, but if you look at the 0 column all the way to the bottom, where it talks about expression of ideas, that little box, it says, please note that if a response receives a score point 0 in development and organization of ideas trait, the response will also earn 0 points in the conventions trait. So just a note to be aware of. Okay. So let's go back to our prompt. So also for you, It does help. As I've said, these are text dependent. We're writing the kids must use the text, right, to write their answers. So it would help if you had some knowledge of the passages that the kids are reading. They're actually reading two here. I dropped in the chat the STAAR. This is from the 2018 release. So if you wanted to, like, in a minute, really quick, go kind of look at those. I do recommend this is like an efficient scoring because of the limited time. But to score your own children's, of course, you would need to read and make sure you really understand clearly the ideas so that you know exactly how to score those with the rubric. So, okay, this is what the prompt says. Those of you who are fourth grade teachers are familiar with this. Read the selection Night Flyers and the article A Sweet Part of Nature. Write a response to the following. In what ways are the bats and night flyers and the honeybees and A Sweet Part of Nature different? Then it says, write a well-organized informational essay that uses specific evidence from the passage to support your answer. So the kids are basically write an informational essay based on the differences between the bats and the honeybees. So let's look at our first student sample. Askia's going to read it to you in just a second. And while he does, I want you to we really need to think about the rubric. So as he's reading, really just listen and think through that. And then I want you to read the scoring rubric and look for descriptors in the rubric that describe the writing sample. Okay. And then in the chat, you'll just put the score that you gave it, but really trying to ground ourselves in the rubric to describe and to match up where we think the kids' writing is in this response. Okay, Askia.
All right. Although bats and honeybees are similar in some ways, they also have some differences. Bats and honeybees are different, so they can each play their own special role to help the world. One way bats and honeybees are different because bats are nocturnal and honeybees aren't. I chose this evidence because I know bats are nocturnal and honeybees aren't from my background knowledge. And in the first paragraph of Night Flyers, it says Night Flyers in the first paragraph, and in the title, it says it. Another reason is because why they are different is because honeybees get diseases and viruses from bugs and insects, while bats eat the bugs and insects that give viruses and diseases. I chose this evidence because in summertime science, in the second paragraph too, it says honeybees get viruses and diseases from bugs and insects, while in Night Flyers in paragraph 2, it says bats eat insects that can spread viruses and diseases to animals. As you can see, honeybees and bats are different in lots of ways, but both are beautiful. One day, I hope you can see those beautiful creatures.
All right. Thank you, Askia. So let's go into our rubric now. If you're with a team, you might want to talk about this a little bit. But looking at your one pager, read the scoring rubric. We're going to score it for, the whole 5 points out of 5 points, right? So looking at those two parts in the rubric and really trying to, if you say whatever point it is. So what you might want to do first is if you're with a team, look at the organization idea development, talk about that, and then give it whatever points system, whatever you feel it matches up with, and then go on to conventions and decide that, and then you add them together for the total. Does that make sense? So I'm going to give you a couple of, we'll see, a minute or so just to kind of talk and see where we are. When you feel like you have your score, you can put it in the chat. So for example, let's say this is not the score, but let's say you gave it a 1 for ideas and organization and a 1 for conventions. That would be a score of 2. So you could put 2 in the chat. Or if you want to do them separately, you could say I gave it a 1 for organization and a 1 for conventions. So we can total up the points. Okay, so give yourself some time to score and talk, really using the descriptors from the rubric. Okay, so I'm going to give you a little bit more time. I know some of y'all are in groups, so you're having conversations. Again, if you'd like to give your score, like the last person, Amanda, she broke it down by ideas and then conventions as those parts of the rubric. So you can do that. And I'll give you a little bit more time. I also want you to really, if you did score whatever it is, I want you to go to the next category and really be thinking about, is there any possibility that it could be more of this, or is it definitely, like for example, if you said it was a 3 for central ideas, we'll look over to the 2 and read those descriptors. Is there anything that could be true there, or do you firmly believe that it's a 3? And if it is a 3 for ideas, it needs to be 3 on all of the pieces. So that means the central idea, the organization, the evidence, and the expression. All of those would need to be a 3 to get a 3. So just think about that a little more. I'll give you a few more seconds. Okay, so let's talk about it a little bit. This one scored 2 for ideas, and it scored a 1 for conventions. And when this response was scored, we felt like the central idea was clear. It was identifiable. When we went down to organization, I think Allison said earlier, there's some unnecessary information and some sentence structure that are distracting, that detract or that distract. And so we felt that the introduction was clear, the conclusion was present. I wouldn't say that we didn't think the conclusion was effectively supporting the central idea. The structure, it says the organizational structure may not be consistent and not always support the logical development of central idea. Sentence to sentence connection and clarity may be lacking. So that's kind of, I think, what Allison might have been saying there. So while it did start off with the clear central idea as a 3, it did go over to a 2 for us, and then evidence was insufficiently explained, and some evidence may be irrelevant to the central idea. It's important, like when the child writes, one way bats and honeybees are different because bats are nocturnal and honeybees aren't. I chose this evidence because I know bats are nocturnal and honeybees aren't from my background knowledge. So remember, this is text evidence. It's evidence-based writing. So so far up to that point, the child was not using text evidence. So that wouldn't be sufficient evidence from their background. But then it does go on to say in the first paragraph of Night Flyers, it says Night Flyers in the first paragraph, and the title says it. So like they're giving us some evidence, like it's saying this phrase or these words. But then in the rubric, when it says for evidence insufficiently explained, like seems like there needs to be some more there before they go on to their next reason. And then that sentence construction of that is also a little confusing, and so it kind of interferes there a bit. So the evidence being insufficiently explained, or some evidence may be irrelevant, such as the background knowledge, kind of brought it over to a 2. And once you kind of go over to a 2, it can't be a full 3. It has to be there in that. And so then for a 1, conventions, there was some, it says the response has several errors, but the reader can understand the writer's thought. So the thought was that the conventions, especially the punctuation, distracted a little bit from a clear message of like having to reread or something like that. Okay. Have any questions on that one? We're going to try another one together. We were pretty close, all in all. Askia says there's clearly some periods and commas missing. Yeah. So, what a next step. Let's think about what a next step would be. I think we would celebrate with the student, like you have a clear central idea. That's really important. They've learned that it's an important standard for the students, readiness standard, and so they've gotten that down. They did have the overall quality was there, right? Overall, the idea is there. They just need to work a little bit. Remember when you're done reading, go back and reread, edit, and make sure that your evidence is clearly pointing to your central idea and like explaining that. Do y'all have any things you would celebrate with the kid or some next steps that you think might help? You can put them in the chat or unmic. Okay, well, let's go to the next one. Okay, this is, again, same. These are all from 4th grade, just the one we took in December. So Askia's going to read it, and we're going to do the same thing.
Honeybees and bats are similar, yet so different. They are similar because they can both fly. Although they both live in different place in night flyers, it says each year 20 million Mexican free-tailed bats return to Bracken Cave. So bats live in caves. In How Humans Can Help, it says people can also build beehives so that more bees will live in the area. So you can now see the different places in which these two animals live. Now you know the similarities between bats and bees.
All right, thank you, Askia. So let's do the same thing with our teams or on your own. Think back to your rubric, looking for descriptors. Where do you think it, off? I think it's a whatever. Start there, and then read the descriptors. Really trying to use the descriptors that match what the child is doing here in their written response. And when you have something, you can put it in the chat. If you want to do it like we did earlier, ideas, that overall 3-point category, and then conventions that overall 2-point, telling what you got out of those total points. All right, thank you, Benjamin. He's leading us. Go ahead and put once you get your ideas, be brave and put those in there. We're all learning, so scoring and calibrating is a really important part of this process. The longer we would do this, the closer we would get together and score, but we're just starting off, so let's see what we have. Thank you, Christina and Jesus. Okay, it looks like the chat's pretty full. I'm not sure if there's anyone else still discussing. This is a little shorter of a response, so maybe we're wrapping that up now. So looking at your responses in the chat, the score that was given to this was let's see, 2 points. Sorry, I was thinking about something else. 2 points, 1 point for the organization idea development, and then 1 point for conventions. And thinking through the rubric on a 1, under the organization and development ideas, it's a central idea is evident but not developed. A central idea is present but not developed appropriately in response to the task. That was the descriptor that fit. It is a very brief response. If you look, what is it? 2,300 characters is what they can have. So it is pretty brief. So the development is lacking. And then under organization, that was also a 1. The part that really kind of got it was an organizational structure that supports logical development is not always evident. It got a little confusing in there and some of it could have been some punctuation issue, but where it says, although they both live in different place, in the night flowers, it says each year 20 million Mexican free-tailed bats return to Bracken Cave. So bats live in caves, and how humans can help is the people can also build beehives, so more bees will live in that area. You can have to do some inferring there to make that logical connection and that development. So also under evidence, actually, the feeling was that the evidence was a little better, maybe a 2. There was some evidence, although it was insufficiently explained and it might have seemed a little irrelevant to the central idea, but maybe that development could have improved that. And then expression of ideas is ineffective under a 1. Sentences and phrases are often ineffective or interfere with the meaning or impact the strength and clarity. So that it got a little confusing in there. Like you could read between the lines and make the connections of what the writer was trying to say. But and then, so let's see. In the chat, let's see what we have. And the conclusion also says similarities when the question asked for differences. Did y'all see that too? So it got a little confusing for the child. So I think, having our writers go back and as a strategy, go back and reread once you're done and make sure, that whatever the question said, kind of circle, what are you doing? Circle those and make sure, underline and make sure that your response is addressing those directly and they wouldn't be confusing. So, okay. Any other questions about that or thoughts, anything this led to in discussion? So, this is our first really round. Well, we had the first round at the beginning of the year of what the interim was, but this one, our first round, like in a formal training to sit and do this calibration and scoring. And it is a very new rubric, and we do have a bank that we can use, our own student samples that we can start working through with our colleagues and really talking through the rubric, telling what we think, trying to find evidence. That's really going to be our tool right now, is this rubric, and really the descriptors is really going to be what we have right now. In the past, in the old STAAR writing, they had a scoring guide where it showed like an example of a 4, several 4s. Well, this is a different scoring, but like, for example, with this, it would show like 3s, it would show 2s, it would show 1s for our organization, and it would have like comments from the raters so that we could calibrate to that. And then it would do conventions like this is a convention 2, this is a convention 1, and we could calibrate to that student sample. Right now, the state doesn't have that. They do have previously what we shared, a guide, but it's limited to certain grades only and not all the genres. So right now, just coming around the table together with these rubrics and really just trying the best we can will help. And so we have one more, and Askia shared with you the Texas Formative Assessment Resource, which is in the past. Well, let's talk about this one and then we'll come back to his thing. So here is a response. He is going to read it, and we're going to give you a minute, and then we're just going to, I'm pretty sure you'll come to the same conclusion that the score is, but we just wanted you to see a final example to kind of tie off our scoring today. And go ahead, let's go. Thank you.
I think bats and honeybees are different. I think this because bats and honeybees produce different things. Another reason I think bats and honeybees are different is bats eat insects and honeybees don't. I especially think bats and honeybees are different because honeybees' population is declining. My first reason bats and honeybees are different is they produce different things. For example, in the text it says bats produce droppings that make excellent fertilizer. Honeybees produce or carry pollen among plants. Another reason bats and honeybees are different is bats eat insects and honeybees don't. For instance, in the text, it says that solitary bat can eat 1,000 mosquito-sized insects. And the text also says bats eat insects that can be harmful to plants, animals, and even humans. But when I look at the text for honeybees, I see that honeybees are suffering from diseases and catching viruses from bugs and insects. I especially think bats and honeybees are different because honeybees' population is declining. For evidence in the text, it says there aren't as many honeybees today as there were a few years ago. But this caused by not being healthy. And like I said before, honeybees are suffering from disease and catching viruses. But bats, on the other hand, aren't declining in population. They are declining in places to live. This shows that bats and honeybees are different in three ways. One, they produce different things. Two, bats eat insects, honeybees don't. And lastly, three, honeybee population is declining.
Okay. So thank you, Askia. So just take a couple, glance at your book and see what you think. I'm going to give you like a minute to think through that, and then we'll tell you what it scored.
Julie, you're muted.
Oh my. Okay. Sorry. Thank you. I was just talking to my over here. So the paper, it did score a 5. So for organization and development of ideas, all the way down, it had a clear idea. The focus was consistent throughout. It felt unified. It felt easy to follow, and effective introduction and conclusion. The sentences and the paragraphs and ideas were connected in purposeful ways. The word choice was specific and purposeful. In fact, this response does highlight, I think, word choice being something that enhanced. The child uses some really specific, and then so for conventions, let's see, what about misspellings? So for misspellings, it says consistent command of grade level appropriate conventions. And so there are some misspelled words, but it's not, if you were to go through and count them, I don't think, it says the response has few errors, but those errors do not impact the clarity of the writing. Generally, you understand what the word is, and you're able to read through the word without having to reread or get stumped. So the errors don't impact the clarity of the writing in this example.
I thought it was, Julie, I thought it was a 1-2 until I read that part that you just read that said, oh, it can have some errors as long as they don't significantly impact. So I literally was on the 1, and then I read that. I was like, oh, no, I guess it does have to get a 2 because there are some errors, but it doesn't impact the clarity.
Yeah, I think so. So, all right. So hopefully that helps. If you have any questions, please put those. I wanted to share in the chat, or if you have any other thoughts. This is, I'm going to drop 2 links for you. And then I'm going to go back and talk about the link, or Askia could go back and talk about the link that he dropped too. So this that I just dropped is the grades 3 through 5 RLA constructed response scoring guide. And so what you'll find in there is student samples from the field test in the spring. So it has a short constructed response section with actual, like, this is the prompt and what the kids wrote, and then TEA's scoring in their comments, and to help you. It's not for all grades. It's not like, in my mind, I thought, oh, TEA is going to give us grades 3, 4, and 5 examples. They haven't done that here. It's only certain grade levels. So it's a little limited, but it does give us more information than we had prior to that. And then it does give us an extended response that you'll find, which is the one about the boats that we read earlier. And so the English one for the extended response gives examples of an argument opinion essay. This, for those of you that are dual language, the second one is that I'm dropping right now. This is the Spanish RLA constructed response guide. Very similar to English, except for in Spanish, they gave the student sample as an informative essay instead of argumentative. So if you're able to speak English and Spanish, you get a full picture of both examples. So I wanted to make sure that y'all had that. And Askia, did you want to talk a little bit about the link you dropped in from the TFAR?
Well, I was just putting that there because I think we do have access to that, and that's just something you can go to get information. Also, it shows it's the Cambium is the name of the software, right? That students will use on the actual STAAR. So I just thought it would be pertinent to share.
Absolutely. So if y'all are looking for items, I can't speak to Askia's, I'm not sure about his, but right now in the TFAR resource, they have more reading. And so there's not a lot of writing in there, but they are examples, and the kids can do them in Cambium, so they can kind of get used to like those tools and different things there. And I'm sure they're going to be growing that resource as they go as well. So that's something that you might look for if you're looking for, exit tickets or practice for the kids. Okay, classroom implications.
So next, we're going to move on just briefly to some classroom implications. I'm going to drop another link in the chat as we move on. What you see now on the screen just goes through the short constructed and the extended constructed response. And just it's kind of like an overview of question stems. The link that I dropped in the chat, however, goes through, and this snip here is not even the whole document. If you have it already pulled up, you can see that it has everything on it. And it goes through, like if you're in the classroom and you're trying to, not just for constructed response and extended constructed response, but if you want kids to be more proficient at multi-select, like what are some things that can be done in the classroom to help improve them answering those type of questions on tests? And it would be like card source or paper-based multi-select. And this just gives you a list of options that can be used for that. And it's a low-tech list, but it is a list of options that you can use for that. It's with respect to the constructed response for science, it's really imperative that students are writing in science all the time. And I know you've heard that many times. Whether that student notebook is digital or paper-based, doesn't matter, but they need to be writing in relation to the investigations and the experiments that they're doing in class. And that will help them when it comes time to justify their answers on classroom-based assessments and the STAAR. This is just a quote that we wanted to close us out on. There is another slide after this, but it just says tests are just one definition of mastery. And I know you know that. Real world contexts are another definition of mastery. This is what we want to get to. This is from the curriculum management improvement model, and that's just food for thought.
All right, thank you, Skit. Yes, and so, you know, balancing the standardized test and that part with what happens in the classroom is important, especially after the STAAR redesign was really redesigned based on effective classroom practices, and the state wanting the STAAR to be, you know, more best practice based. Some effective contexts that we can use as we think about developing our students and supporting them in their language and literacy are practices that I know that you're already doing and doing well with students. It's evident from the responses that they have strengths. You know, there's always things at this point in the year that we build on and further continue. But thinking about explicit teacher modeling of reading and writing, the skills and strategies for kids, think alouds, letting them understand how strategies work with skills, interactive read alouds, giving, you know, picking great literature and getting, you know, reading those to kids, talking about them, letting them see and hear your thinking, getting them to stop and talk and respond with a partner or as a group, or just lots of opportunities to talk and respond. Especially text evidence. How do you know that? What makes you think that? That kind of conversations that are going on all the time throughout Round Rock in our classrooms. Daily discussion opportunities, turn and talk routines. I know Benchmark has some really good, great posters for discussions. If you're looking for some structures or scaffolds, you can find those there. But having those discussion opportunities every day, using the text, you know, using evidence, textual support, and not just in language arts, right? But in science and math and social studies, anytime that we interact, language arts is teaching language, right? And so teaching kids how to talk and how to bring out what they're thinking and ground it in the text or whatever it is that they're doing to support them in their thinking. Independent reading, of course, we have this as a standard, right? And kids need to be reading, and we have tools that can support them, and of course the teacher as a support. Book clubs, a great opportunity for kids to have choice in what they're reading and to talk about those books with peers, and using evidence, just another great opportunity for that thinking and analyzing to go on. Independent writing, of course, like we said earlier, you're doing independent reading. The kids need time to work independently and to, like I said earlier, if you're learning to drive a car, you have to actually drive the car. So we need to give kids time to read independently and write with support. Also, of course, writing in response to reading across the day, not just in language arts, but all the time. And thinking about that too before, as scaffolding towards writing. The actual physical act of writing could be oracy, like talking about your thoughts. What did you think here? And like a lot of that, like responding doesn't always have to be just like writing and writing and writing pages of things. It can be, a stop and jot. It could be a sticky note. It could be a flag, illustration, anything to gather or to capture kids' thinking. And then we can teach them, like, you can also take this reaction and you can take it deeper and you can write off of that. And so, really, just building those opportunities for kids as a daily thing will help as we mold what they're doing and try to get them ready for writing on STAAR. Of course, establishing safe, student-centered, risk-taking environments in a workshop and celebrating everything that they're doing. All the small things make big things, and so those are important. There is an article which you can read later from Dr. Richard Allington on the 6 T's of effective early literacy instruction, which include text, time to talk, and more T's than those. So I'll give you those for now. And then also just thinking about the thinking that kids do. So within a readers or writers workshop, the kids really are, if you look at that pyramid, creating, evaluating, analyzing, and standardized tests really usually fall towards those lower levels of blooms. So of course we have to support kids with those, but getting them in those upper levels and really getting them to think and be critical readers and writers and talking about what they're thinking is really important and as a life skill as well. And so we also have this Teaks strand tree, which you might be familiar with if you've taken the Texas Reading Academies. And so it really illustrates how we have foundational skills, which are like the roots of our literacy, right? That really ground us and help us. And then as those develop, then we have comprehension skills growing out of that, and we're able to think about that metacognition, thinking about what we're reading, and then thinking about our response skills, author's purpose and craft, composition, inquiry, research, multiple genres. All of those things are related to comprehension. And so just thinking about that, and I do want to mention too this year that in grades 3 through 5, the ARC has been rewritten starting last spring based on the assessed curriculum to support and front load the standards for kids towards a grade level mastery of the standards as well as STAAR success. And so there are units in the ARC this year for language arts that do teach writing in response to reading, and we do embed different types of just annotation and response to reading besides writing, which is not the only type, right, across the year to build that with kids. So hopefully you're finding success with those. Of course, we're always learning about STAAR. There's so much to learn still. And we're just going to keep learning and keep updating the ARC and sharing with you what we know, and doing the best we can to support you and, of course, ultimately our kids. So thank you for all that you're doing and all that you've done. Askia, I'm going to go back and find that feedback.
Yeah, I just posted it. So I just dropped the link back in the chat for that Google form. So this is how you will, you definitely need to register in Eduphoria, but so that we know you were here, you need to fill out this form. It only has 3 questions, your name, your campus, and if you want to give us feedback on the presentation, that would be great. What else? If you're in a room with like 10, 20 people, and just one of you has the presentation up and link, please ensure that everyone gets the link. We will be granting credit tomorrow. So it would be great if you could fill that out today and register in Eduphoria today, so that we can make sure that everyone that needs to get credit gets credit. I think that's about all we have. I am excited for this new calendar year, and it's going to be great. If you have any questions, feel free to stick around and ask those. I'll stick around for another minute or so. The presentation is recorded. We will send that link out to everyone that responds to the survey. That's how we're going to send that out. It says that Eduphoria was closed. Julie's about to get on that right now and see why it's closed. But we'll get that fixed. Outside